Welcome to Women in the Middle Entrepreneurs, the podcast that gives you an unfiltered, behind-the-scenes look at what it's really like being a woman in the middle who's over 50 and following her entrepreneurial dreams. Grab a superhero cape, girlfriend, because you deserve one. I'm your host, Master Certified Life Coach and Midlife Mentor, Suzy Rosenstein, and I am excited to inspire you with interviews that feature all of this midlife amazingness. Let's go. Hey there, welcome back to the show. We have another really exciting interview ahead of us about the health and professional challenges and changes women experience as midlife career professionals. Today, you'll be meeting Louise Neil, a woman in the middle entrepreneur who splits her time helping midlife women navigate career transitions, as well as supporting women and educating employers around perimenopause in the workplace so that women reclaim their voice, energy, and direction to thrive at this point in their lives. Welcome to the show, Louise. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, Suzy. Thanks for the invite. I'm super glad to be here.
I can tell right away we're going to have a great conversation. We're going to be talking about your midlife entrepreneur story. We'll be talking about your business, what's going really well. Also, how menopause and everything affected you, what midlife issues might be getting in your way to some extent and might be challenging for you in your life, as well as being a business owner. So I always start with a big, juicy question. How old are you? How long have you been an entrepreneur? And what it is that you do in the world? So take it away.
Yeah, I don't know why that's so juicy around our age, but I am 53.
Well, the juicy part is the way I've lumped in all those questions.
So yeah, and I've been an entrepreneur for just over 8 years. I call myself an accidental entrepreneur because I never imagined in a million years that I would be running my own business. Never mind running my own business from my home. But yeah, I spent decades of my life in corporate. I was in project management, IT, product development. And I found myself in a place that didn't fit or feel good at all. And so I went on a bit of a journey myself to try to figure out what that might be, what that could look like. And I found my way into coaching and helping women with that same problem, right? Is how do we transition in midlife when we've taken decades of our lives to be an expert or refine our careers and really show up. And then we get to a place where it doesn't fit or feel good. And it can be a real struggle. It can touch us and impact our identity and all of that. And so that's the space I love to be in, and I love to help women kind of come back home to themselves, right, and figure out who they are and what's important and how does work fit into all of that. And so that's the career piece of my business.
Now, I have to say, it's funny because you describe that the same way I describe not becoming an entrepreneur, but having a podcast. I always say, never in a million years would I have imagined that I'd be doing a podcast for 8 years now, over 8 years, and that it's so techy. And here I sit without any support.
Yeah, it's funny how we find our way, right? And we find that space that just feels so juicy and it feels so much like who we are, right? And it brings energy to us instead of sucking energy.
Exactly. Now, I have to say, I do have support, but they're not here in my house. Now, one of the things that you noted was burning out. So your situation with IT and being in corporate and project management, as long as you were, what happened that you noticed that it might be burnout?
Yeah, and so it's really about a change, right? I think when we think about burnout, it's about kind of seeing this arc of like who we were and how we're not that anymore. And so a lot of my burnout was really around feeling disconnected from the work that I was doing. I didn't feel like I was making an impact. I didn't feel like I was bringing value. And I started to really have like this core self-confidence piece just plummet. I found myself struggling to do things that were easy before. And it was really kind of in that space that I really started to say, like, well, what am I doing here if this is such a struggle? Like, I got to a place where I was crying in the parking lot every day before I walked into the office. And I didn't really know why, right? It wasn't a place for me. And it was before, right? And so it's that change, I think, that comes around where we really start to question like, well, like, who am I now, and like what's going on, why is this happening? Yeah.
Yeah. It's so jarring. There's so many parts of the midlife journey that are just jarring and a gift because they make you do some reflection. Now, when did you start to figure out that perimenopause might have some kind of a role in your experience?
It's not until much later when I actually started to really have some perimenopause symptoms that started me down this journey of like what is perimenopause? Like, I know menopause is like, right, our period ends and then I don't even know what happens after that. But that was kind of my step into perimenopause and menopause, and I started to do a lot of research around what was happening with me. And so, what was happening with these night sweats? What was happening with incontinence? What was all of these things? What was going on? Because I wasn't getting help from my healthcare professional. My doctor was not a help at all in this journey. And it was only then when I started to do the research on what perimenopause actually is and all of the symptoms that I could start to look back and go, holy crap, like the perimenopause can look like burnout. And all of these symptoms that happen, right? Our sleep is disrupted. That could be perimenopause or could be burnout, right? Our stress and how we handle stress, that's also impacted by perimenopause. And so this disconnection that I was having. And so it wasn't until I came through the other side and really started to do my research that I actually noticed all of these dots that I could start to connect. And I just felt ripped off. I felt like if I had only known this when I was going through it, I would have maybe sought a different kind of help or talked to a different kind of professional. Instead of crying in my car, not knowing really what was happening, maybe I would have been able to talk to, right, a healthcare practitioner or look at other ways to do that. And so that was kind of my journey through that was like a reflection back. And I started to get angry and upset that I didn't know this stuff and I didn't know where to go to find it.
It's
And
so
so,
weird because we're so
right?
accomplished and we've been able to figure stuff out for decades. And then this, I mean, it has changed a little bit since I pivoted into this second career myself as a midlife transition coach. But when I first started, people weren't really talking about it. And so that was in 2013 is when I got laid off. So I've been in the space for whatever that is, 12 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to, should I edit that out? So I've been at over a decade and yeah, and things are really changed. I've interviewed so many people now who are working in the menopause, perimenopause space and adding so much value. And like, I think what really struck me when you were telling your story is that you would have asked different questions. You had different
Yeah.
awareness. You would have asked different questions and it would have taken you down different paths. It's so interesting. Now, the first thing you did was to launch Pivoting Point Coaching and Consulting to support midlife professionals navigating career transitions. So that was the first thing that made sense to you. Then
Mhm.
how did you take the leap to also focus on menopause?
Well, so much like I was going through my own perimenopause struggles, like and trying to right build a business and figure all of this business entrepreneurial stuff out while going through brain fog, while having really crappy sleeps, while having like hormonal rage and frustration. I started to actually hear the same things echo in my clients. And so my clients were coming to me to say, hey, I need help figuring out what to do next, and I don't feel like myself. And so that what I was going through was being echoed right back at me. And it came to a point where like I don't think we can talk about midlife transitions in career if we're not talking about perimenopause and menopause transitions. Like the two are so closely connected. And if we're not getting support in one of those areas, the other is really, really going to suffer. And so that was like, I don't feel like I necessarily pivoted out of, right, helping women transition their careers. This is now an add-on. This is now, let's look at it more holistically so that we come out the other side of this like more brilliant and amazing than we went into this transition.
Boy, what strikes me right away is something I learned somewhere along the line in 27 years before becoming a coach. I was in the health education space, and I remember hearing die before cry. So, as you're talking about corporate and corporate culture and women working in corporate, and now you've got something where crying is actually something that's going on and a part of
Yeah.
menopause. I mean, you don't need to be in perimenopause to cry, but like, you mentioned rage. I'm flashing back to when I had that, so it's really mixing something personal and physical holistically with something that traditionally has like a square around it, like a box. So very separate. Work is over there, personal is over here. So when you were thinking about this merger, which I guess is it's a merger, not an acquisition, but it's a merger. Like, were you worried about it or were you just excited about it? How are you feeling about going in a direction that would be very unusual for many players in corporate?
Ooh, yeah. So more curious than cautious. And yet I wanted one of the things that bubbling up for me is how do I do this with so much care that as much care as I could possibly muster because it's so important. I want to make sure that I'm not like rushing into something that I might trip over. That's a lot about how I built my first business, right? Pivoting Point was born through a lot of spaghetti on a wall and seeing what worked and what didn't work. And that was through some of that through COVID too. But a lot of it was very much trial and error. And as much as we need trial and error in our businesses to move forward, I wanted to just take a little bit of a different approach and I wanted to slow down and I wanted to listen. And so I took a long time gathering information around what people are noticing, what they're seeing, what they're feeling, what they're hearing. And that's not just about women, that's about men in the workplace too. And what are they struggling with when they have women as team members, right? How are they not talking about it? What do they feel like when they're seeing right, their team struggle and they don't know how to talk about it? So I really I put the brakes on a little bit and went on a bit of a listening tour just to kind of ground myself and ground my program in something that I feel is really impactful and going to make a difference, not just for women, but for workplaces too.
Right, that really stood out when I got your application, and I guess the other thing that I'm thinking about is this idea that you're helping to create menopause-aware workplaces. Right away, I'm like, "Eek!" There's so much ageism and so many things that women do not wanna share about aging or their experience of aging. So, how has that come up for you?
Yeah, and so it's really interesting because we as women we bring that backpack in the room with us. How do we take that off so that we're getting the care and the support that we need? And it takes right, it takes us to be a little bit brave.
A lot
But
brave.
and also for workplaces to be brave too. So to think about like let's think about menopause that's it's bigger than just a health issue, right? Like menopause is more than just, right, our period ending. There's so much that goes into that. And workplaces do see an impact of women who leave the workforce. Like 1 in 10 women leave the workforce due to unmanaged menopause symptoms. Like that number sounds crazy to me.
It does.
10% of women leave the workforce.
Wow.
And women are stepping back as well. Maybe they're not taking leadership roles because they can't figure out what's going on. There's a retention piece that workplaces, I feel, need to be paying attention to. We need to be talking about menopause in the workplace like we talk about mental health because there's a mental health component to menopause. This isn't just a thing. This is like this whole thing. It impacts who we are, how we show up, how we deliver, our confidence, right? And I believe workplaces are the perfect place to start to pick up this torch and really help educate women because that's a big thing that we're missing, right? We don't get menopause classes like we got sex ed in high school or junior high, right? We don't have this knowledge, and I really feel workplaces can kind of step in under wellness programs to provide this information. But then let's take it further. Let's talk about inclusivity. Let's talk about accommodation. Let's talk about how do we keep these women in the workforce, these brilliant people who have so much knowledge, right? Decades of knowledge. How do we support and keep them in the workforce through this transition? So because it's a transition, right? Like
Yeah.
this is what we're talking about. We go through a crunchy spot in our lives. How do we as workplaces support women who are going through that crunchy bit and help them on the other side of it? It's just, to me, it's like a win-win. And yet it's still taboo,
Oh,
right?
for sure. And the other thing I wanted to mention before we move on is that I had not heard the term menopause doula before. I've heard death doula, I've heard birth doula. So is this a new term or something you just thought made sense? Like, where did it come from? I love it. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And so being a doula is different than being a coach, right? And I wanted to make that distinction. I think there's a lot of folks on social media who say I'm a menopause coach and I'm going to coach you through menopause. And it's like I believe we need something different and that we need something a little bit more than just coaching. We need education and support. And that's really what a doula brings to the event, right? A birth doula brings lots of information and education and helps a woman find her own birth plan, create her own birth journey. And a menopause doula does the same thing. I help women create their own journey through this transition by education, support, and really coming back to themselves. And so I did some training through Doula Canada that actually had a bit of a program. It brought it back to me as to what I feel not just the gap is, but what I want to deliver. And a doula is really the space that I occupy, and I want to be really clear about what that is because it's very different than coaching.
How have you noticed that being an older woman affects being an entrepreneur and vice versa? So I'm not saying old, I'm saying older because you're older than you were when you were in corporate. And I don't have a thing about being older. And I know you probably don't either in the work that you're in. But as a woman in your age and stage, as an entrepreneur, have you noticed anything?
Well, I feel like I came into entrepreneurship without any preconceived ideas because I'm that accidental entrepreneur, right? And so kind of launching into this whole second act of my career, I really started to approach it much differently around like where am I intentional? Where am I delivering my energy and where am I getting my energy back from? And that's not something I ever thought about in corporate, right? It was just go, 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 run, 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 push, push, push. And so when I started my entrepreneurial journey, I was very intentional of like, I left corporate, so I want to leave that behind and really starting to kind of tap into my energy. Now I fall back all the time, right? Like I fall back into that corporate space all the time where all of a sudden I'm working 9 to 5 or I'm feeling like I got to grind or I'm attached to my desk. And it's like, no, 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 like that's not why I started my business. So I have to keep remembering that, but I'm also a different person now. Right? I want to honor those things that are happening to me. Like I'm deep in menopause right now. And so brain fog, sleeping, getting energy, showing up for my clients, like those are so important to me.
Yeah.
And so I pay attention to those things. If I need a nap in the middle of the day, I need a nap. And that's just where I'm at. And I want to really embrace that. And I think as like a younger version of me would be like, "What? You're napping?" Like, and so it's really about, just tapping in and honoring like who we are, paying attention to that whole energy thing
Yeah.
really makes a difference. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not just you're noticing that you have a need, but you're also committing to nurturing yourself and providing a solution for that need. You're taking care of yourself. So that's a big difference.
Yeah.
That's a really
Yeah.
big difference. Yeah. The other thing you mentioned in your note is that midlife actually gives you credibility and perspective that you didn't have earlier. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, like I think especially when we look at career pivots or like going into something different in our second act, like we have this whole bunch of knowledge and wisdom that we bring with us. And so no matter what your pivot is, like that stuff doesn't fall off. Like that's who you are. And that's what you bring into your next career pivot. And I never want to forget like what it was like in corporate because now I can connect to my clients on a very different level. And really help them see things a little bit differently, but all of that comes with me. It comes with all of us. We have like these skills and strengths, gifts, talents, or superpowers, right? We get to shine on that. And that
Exactly.
has come, right? That's come from decades of training and education and knowledge. Doesn't matter what field or industry. Like we have that. It's in our blood. And I think we forget that when we get to midlife and we
I
look at a
agree.
transition. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're like, "Oh, I can't do that. That's so different." And it's like, "No, no, no. Like, what are you bringing? It's like a sweater, right? Like, what are you bringing with you?" All of that stuff
So
stays.
much more. Wisdom is such a
Yeah,
big deal that we don't really appreciate, but the wisdom of life, navigating relationships, teamwork, all that stuff, we're seasoned pros at this point.
yeah, yeah. And it comes as part of our instinct, right?
Yes.
And really tapping into that, I think, is a big difference than when you think about who you were earlier in your career. You didn't have an instinct. You hadn't honed that yet, right? But these last decades have been all practice around honing your skills and figuring out what you're good at, what you're not good at, what do you want to do, what do you not want to do. And now in our second act in this transition, we get to put those skills into practice.
Definitely. So what do you want next in your business?
Who, um, it's so interesting. I'm really focused in this next phase of my business of trying to get into more and more organizations to change the way we talk about menopause at work. I love the work I do with private clients, and that's always going to be a part of it. And now I just feel like after 8 years of leaving corporate, it's time that I dip my toe back in the water and really help organizations who want to make a difference. And that's just the place I want to play. And it lights me up when I have conversations with folks, men and women, who are like, absolutely, we need what you have. I can see it in my teams and in my staff that we're struggling, and that lights me up. But and that changes the way we work at work, right? Like that changes everything. Like I often imagine, Susie, like what if this glass ceiling that we just can't seem to break through is this silence around perimenopause and menopause? If we can talk about that at work, what changes? Like it could be big.
It's really even hard to imagine. Like when you just posed that question, I could tell I kind of went blank because for it to really happen would be unbelievable. It would be I just imagine so much compassion, so much support, so much understanding, so much equality.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know. Um, I want to help organizations like light that fire within them so that they can really start to look at what it means to support women throughout any life stage. What does it mean to support women in the workplace?
And then what do you want personally while you're building this business? You said dipping
Oh,
your toe back into corporate. That's
yeah,
big. That's really
yeah.
big.
Yeah. Um, I think for myself, it's what's been happening in this last while. I want to keep it going. And so the excitement and the energy that I feel when I'm talking about this topic, whatever the topic is, I want to keep that alive for me, right? It brings me joy. And that's a whole big part of this business. I never started this business thinking I was going to be right $1 million in revenue. What I started this business for was about the joy and the fulfillment that it brings me, and this business will continue to evolve as I continue to evolve. What I feel, where I feel joy, the business will fulfill that. And so that's me. Like me and the business are kind of like one in that way. But not in a way that's grindy or that I'm losing myself, right? It's
Right.
about this ebb and flow of, right, where do I get energy and where do I give the energy?
Right, right. That's so good. And I have to say that your answer to this next question we're going to talk about, I loved. And I hadn't heard it described quite like this before. And the question in the application is, what's the most surprising thing about being a midlife woman over 50 and being an entrepreneur? So, what is surprising? And you said the most surprising thing about being a midlife woman entrepreneur is how much freedom and friction can exist at the same time. Can you tell us a little bit more about freedom and friction?
So I think freedom is maybe that's the given, right? Is that entrepreneurship brings me a certain amount of freedom. It gives me some location independence. It gives me the opportunity to work with who I want to work with. And I don't have to work with everyone like in my corporate role, right? That's the freedom that it brings me. It brings me flexibility in my day, all kinds of freedoms. But it also comes with some friction. And that friction comes most with growth edges. It comes with, where do I challenge myself? And am I challenging myself in a way that I want to grow? It's this, and in midlife, I think we do this a lot, where it's like we struggle with ourselves, right? These internal conflict that can happen is like, yes, I have this great idea. Ooh, am I the one to bring it into the world? Right. And so there's this internal thing that happens with friction. And then also when you're building something that you haven't seen before, we can start to question that as like, well, but why hasn't anybody else done this before? Why isn't this a thing? Is it the wrong thing? And I think that like those questions
Mm,
shake us to the core. And so there is that friction that can really happen, this internal dialogue and this internal battle that we need to get through. But, with friction, I think comes heat. I always think of like rubbing your hands together, right?
right.
And it's like, yeah, it's friction, but it's also like it starts something. It's a start of a fire within us sometimes that we
Yeah. Oh, I
can
love that.
feel. Yeah.
So the name of this is Menomentum. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, and so that's the program that I take into workplaces that talk about like well-being, and so I do wellness seminars and workshops around what is perimenopause and menopause. I also talk to leaders about how do they show up in these spaces, how can they support women, and those are inclusive conversations with all genders, really diving into that leadership component. And then also, I talk to organizations about menopause inclusive policies. What does that look like? How do we make sure that the language we have in some of our HR policies that support other wellness or mental health initiatives are also menopause inclusive. And so, because we don't get diagnosed with menopause, it's not something we walk around with. And so,
Right.
how do we make sure that women plus, can access the resources that they need? And we just want to spell it out crystal clear. And then there's a part of like, how do we build that in an organization? So now it's like self generating. What are the employee resource groups or programs? Who's the champions of menopause in the workplace? And how can workplaces like keep this sustained? This isn't a one and done. I don't go into organizations just to talk about menopause on a lunch and learn. Like let's really think about how is this going to make a change for the women plus in the workplace, but how is this going to change our business? Because it's a leadership development problem too, not just a health problem.
Oh, Louise, this is really, really interesting. Like you're taking it, you're kicking it up a notch, and you yourself are really stepping into a leadership role with bringing awareness to this and systemic change. Like it's something. And I guess you wondered, why didn't anybody do this before?
All the time. But it's that friction, right? And that freedom. And you know what? And the more I talk about it and the more we talk about it, the more conversations are going to start to happen, right? The more people are going to start demanding this kind of support and care in workplaces. And so it's bottom up, it's grassroots, right? Like how do we go into organizations to start talking about what we need, but it's also top down. Who are the champions? How do we get executives and leaders to really embrace this idea around menopause inclusivity? Well, because it impacts their bottom line, it impacts retention, and all of those things, right? Engagement. And so let's look at all of it. And now, if we're going from the bottom up and the top down, Susie, that's where real change happens, right?
Oh, yeah. Wow. So, one of the things that's interesting is thinking about how you cope because, this classic midlife stuff we've been talking about, personally, it's very easy to be challenged by things going on. And we haven't really gotten into, obviously every person is not affected by all of the same midlife challenges, but there are so many. Caring for senior parents is something that a lot of people talk about on this show. And also being having different goals than some of your friends. When you're an entrepreneur, you're all jazzed and you like your work. And then you're dealing with a lot of people in your life who don't love their work. And so, you're gearing up when many other people are gearing down. There's so many things to cope with. So, what are some things that help you cope with running a business and being actively challenged by some of this midlife stuff that you're helping other people with?
Yeah, and so it's finding those, I call them crunchy moments, right? It's finding those places and spaces that don't feel great and then figuring out how to make them feel great. So you talked about, right, community. We were talking about community before as well, right? How do we find places and spaces that are supportive? Like our friends can support us in all kinds of ways. They don't have to be the only source of support. Right? And so how do we when we feel like we need something, where do we go and how do we find it? And so that is finding your people, finding those groups that are also like we're not the only one, right? 50 plus entrepreneurs in the world. Like
For sure.
there's right? There's a lot of folks out there. And so where do we find those places and spaces? But also it's also more than that because it's finding people who share the same values as you. I went through my corporate life misaligned a lot with who I was and the company that I worked for. And now in my business, I have my values, I have my business values, and I want to connect with people who also have those values. And so there's a clarity that needs to come from me about what that is
Yes.
and then be a little ruthless around those boundaries to say, well, these are my values and this is what I uphold. So this is how I'm going to build my business. And there are people also who want to do the same thing as you. But it's really, understanding yourself before you understand your business.
I love that. So, Louise, how can people best get in touch with you?
So I'm going to point folks to LinkedIn because that is probably the place I am the most. But you can also, I have a great website for career pivoters, louiseneil.com. I also started the menopausedoula.ca that really can start to bring information to women who are lacking that. So those are going to be the two best places. If you're an organization, I have some menomentum.org stuff out there on the interweb. But connect with me on LinkedIn because that's where you're going to hear all of the stuff about all of the things. And then we can connect and get you the support that you need in a way that you need it. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. And all of these links, of course, will be in the show notes. This is so amazing, Louise. Thank you so much for taking time from your day and sharing all this good stuff. I really appreciate how you took the leap, how you opened your mind, you took one step, you pivoted, and then you really, really listened to hear what was going on and how you could help your clients best. And it really brought you into such an amazing focus for your work. And I can tell it's incredibly rewarding and fulfilling too. I know as a listener, you can't see, but Louise is a big giant smile on her face. She's smiling during the whole interview and you can tell she's in her zone. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Suzy. You made this conversation so easy. And thank you for the work that you're doing. We need to have more conversations, and you're putting those conversations out into the world. So thank you.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Louise. All right, that's it for now. If you're listening and loving what you hear, please like and subscribe. Reviews are great too and much appreciated. And if you're a woman in the middle who's 50 or over and an entrepreneur and would also like to come on the show, please go to www.midlifeinterviews.com and fill out an application. We'd love to have you on to share your story. Thanks so much for listening. It's never too late to put yourself on your agenda. I'm Suzy Rosenstein, and I'll talk to you again soon. Now, real quick, before we say goodbye, if you are connecting with the show and are finally ready to make some changes to regret-proof your life, I want to invite you to apply for the Women in the Middle Academy. It's my transformational midlife group coaching program to help you get clear about what's getting in your way so you can get on with the good stuff. Head over to www.womeninthemiddleacademy.com. Talk soon.